My name is Julie Cummins. I am a former executive director of the Aspen Writers Foundation, as well as a former board member. And I'm so proud to be a part of this organization, and I am really feel so privileged to be on stage with our esteemed guests this afternoon. Just in case didn't read the program, you're actually in the session called Courting the Muse. And we'll start, ladies first, with Pam Houston. Pam has been introduced on the stage already a few times, so we'll keep it short, but she is the author of 5 books. She has won many writing awards and teaching awards. She is the director of the creative writing program at UC Davis. And when it was published in 1992, her first book, a collection of stories called Cowboys Are My Weakness, it was really a revelation, I think, for millions of women, including me. And in it, she sort of miraculously mapped the psyches of a certain female subset of the population. These are generally strong, independent-minded, vulnerable, confused women whose loopy hearts were prone to picking the wrong men. And she helped, I'll speak for myself, but I think for the other women that I knew who read Pam very early on in her career, and when we were much younger women, she helped us forge an identity for ourselves that neither we nor the culture, I think, had imagined for us yet. And it was a great gift. And 20 years later, in 2012, with 3 books in between, she published her latest novel, Contents May Have Shifted, and again pulled off a wizard trick, I think, with her main character. Pegging the women that we are now, more settled, but still seeking, more compassionate towards ourselves and others, but still a little off balance and plenty screwed up. And in the San Francisco Chronicle, John McMurtry said that Pam Houston is a wonderful writer, and the graceful vignettes in her new novel about the wider sphere of romance the world has to offer are by turns beautiful, slyly funny, and heart-stopping. And, go ahead. You may applaud now if you'd like. And I want to add that Pam has been a great, dear friend and a very important influence on this particular organization and this particular conference for going on 15 years now. So we're really happy to have her here.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. It's been a few years since I've been here, and I'm so happy to be back. I love this valley and this conference. So Julie did ask us to read a little today as just a way to change things up. So I'm just going to read 2 very short vignettes from Contents May Have Shifted, and then talk about how they were born and how they came to be. So there are 144 very short chapters in this book, and they all add up to a novel. So I'm just going to read 2. This is 59, Tucson, Arizona. I have not been on the property 30 minutes when I am lying on a massage table in a softly lit frangipani-scented room with a person named Trevor towering over me. I can see, Trevor says, that you are doing a lot of spiritual work because look how far you are out in your hair. His accent is vaguely South African, and he has the most impressive unibrow I have ever seen. I do not read poetry, Trevor says, because I live poetry. He picks my feet up and lets them fall back to the table. May I ask you, he says, why the lower half of your body is perpetually standing in ice-cold water? He means energetically, of course, because the room is warm and my legs are dry. And what happened here, he asks, not waiting for an answer. He has his hand on my leg at the exact place where, when I was 4 years old, my father threw me so hard against a big oak wardrobe that I broke my femur. The bone healed 40 years ago. I was casted from the tip of my toes to my armpits for months, but Trevor is not the first healer to be able to see what happened. My father, I begin. I am not afraid of your pain, Trevor says. I am not afraid of your grief. I am not afraid of your terror. You want to know why I'm not afraid of your terror? I nod. I am not afraid of your terror because I have gone inside the monster, and inside the monster is pure wonder. Somewhere in this building, my friend Willow, who I have come to Canyon Ranch with, is getting a nice, simple lavender scrub and an herbal wrap. Willow looked through the catalog, thought, yes, the first night, maybe a nice herbal wrap after all that travel. Pamela, Trevor says, will you tell me your father's name so that I may ask him to excuse himself from the lower half of your body? Yes, I say, and I do. Sebastian, Trevor says, Sebastian, you must get out of there. Sebastian, he says, this does not belong to you. He has his eyes closed and his hands tight around my ankles. No, Sebastian, he says more forcefully now, there are no options. We stay like that for an excruciating amount of time. Then he folds my hands across my chest and covers them with his. If you could have only one thing, he says, would you choose peace or ecstasy? Ecstasy, I think, though I'm pretty sure I'm supposed to say peace. Peace is an illusion, Trevor says. I am in the ecstasy nearly all the time now, even when I sleep. I think of the composer's lonely bedroom, the terrible black sheets, the clock radio projecting blood-red digits onto the ceiling, his bald head a glinting Cabernet color like someone already dead. Pamela, Trevor says, slapping the bottom of my feet with his palms. Yes, sir, I say, out of habit. He's got my wrists now, is stretching them back over my head. No one has ever called me Pamela except my father. You have two glasses, Trevor says. One is completely full and one is completely empty. In which glass is stillness possible? The full one, I say. The questions are getting easier. Trevor now has his powerful thumbs wrapped almost completely around my uppermost vertebra. You can get to stillness through ecstasy, he says, but you can't get to ecstasy through stillness. I think about all the ways the language of the New Age is custom made for terrorism. I think about when a pink mouth opened in a white sky over Davis, and I saw for the second time the cupped, waiting hands. When one of the doing lines in your life intersects with the circle of your now, Trevor says, what happens? It has to bend, I say, confident. It bends and eventually becomes a circle. Precisely, he says, and releases his death grip on my neck. And then, more briefly, a lot of other things happen to Pam, and she goes to a lot of other places in the world. Each of the 144 places takes place somewhere differently. But much later in the book, we're now in Trenton, New Jersey, and you'll see how these pieces speak to each other. Trenton, New Jersey. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that my back hurts so much because when I was 4 and in my 3/4 body cast, my mother found it easiest to carry me around upside down like a monkey, using the plaster bar the doctors had fashioned between my knees to keep them, for 3.5 months, the correct distance apart. And let's say she did just that, until my second to last appointment when the orthopedic surgeon said, you haven't been carrying her around by this bar, have you? And my mother shot one quick glance at my father and said, of course not, no. And it became a funny story the two of them liked to tell together to friends over a couple of drinks. And let's say that when their friends asked, as of course they would, how in the name of heaven a 4-year-old breaks her femur, they said that I had somehow managed to pull the giant wardrobe over onto myself. Except instead of wardrobe, they would have said credenza, because it would have made us sound richer than we were. I still don't see how it would make me feel any better to think of the pain in my hip and spine as anything other than my most loyal and valuable companion. The continuous non-voice in my ear that says, you got out alive and you still get to go. No two people who have ever lived loved to travel more than my mother and father. They gave that love in their fashion to me. So that's two little pieces in the book that speak to each other, separated by about 100 pages. And I chose them to talk about where they came from because the first one is so obvious, like there I am in Canyon Ranch. this is my masseuse. He is saying these things to me. You know, there's sometimes the universe just gives you a gift. And Trevor, not his real name, was my gift of the day. You know, it was just all, that conversation actually took place. My friend, not Willow, was actually having an herbal wrap. You know, it was a piece that was just simply given to me. And I wrote it as soon as I got back to my room, so I wouldn't forget anything that he said. The other piece came 6 years and a whole book later. I had written the book, I had sent it to my editor. It had all these pieces. One of the big questions when I was working on it was, does this add up? You know, this is 144 pieces. Do they add up to something? You know, how strong or how much of a narrative arc should I or can I shape this into? And interestingly, my editor said, isn't this the book where you really talk about your father? And my first thought was, dear God, have I talked about anything else my whole entire life? You know, I thought, no, I've already done that. I don't want this to be about that. And it was in that session, you know, but the book didn't focus on it. And it was her advice that made me think to go all the way back to Trenton, New Jersey and childhood, which the book doesn't do at all. That's the only moment in the whole book. And it was really adding that tiny scene that I read second, which again, you know, comes in general from my own personal life, that just it's sometimes the one little missing piece. Like it made sense of Pam's incessant need to travel. It made sense of her complicated relationship with money. It did so many things, and it was really just a great moment of editing where Elaine, my editor, said, you know, this is the thing that you're not explaining. How can you explain it? And so it took that tiny little one that I read second, took 6 years to get to, whereas the first one was one of the very first pieces of this book that I wrote and came super easily.
Right, thank you. We will move next to my left. Pinkney Benedict is nothing short of a blessing. You may have noticed that he is not, in fact, Nino Ricci, listed in your program. In fact, 2 mornings ago, Pinkney was riding his motorcycle on the Blue Ridge Parkway through the Smoky Mountains en route to Tennessee when he got a call from AWF's new creative director, Adrian Brodeur, and over his headset with the wind, as he told it last night, whooshing past his head, Adrian explained to him that his services as a brilliant writer and writing teacher were needed in Aspen immediately, as in that day, Sunday. And it turns out Nino ran into some problems getting into the country at immigration and was not able to arrive on Sunday, the day he was to start teaching. So could Pinkney come to Aspen right away? And he rode his motorcycle to Knoxville and hopped on an airplane and was in Aspen Sunday night.
Wow.
Yay! Ready to begin teaching an 8 a.m. workshop, and he has been teaching our advanced fiction workshop all this week, and we are so grateful. He is the author of 4 works of fiction, including the widely acclaimed Town Smokes, and most recently, Miracle Boy and Other Stories. His stories have been widely anthologized in outlets such as the O. Henry Prize Stories, New Stories from the South, the Pushcart Prize Series, the Oxford Book of American Short Stories, and the Echo Anthology of Contemporary American Short Fiction. He lives in Carbondale, is that true?
Still? Carbondale, Illinois.
Carbondale, Illinois, for those of you who are familiar with the Roaring Fork Valley. And he's a professor in the English department at Southern Illinois University. We could not be more thrilled to have him here on this stage today.
Thank you. Well, you all are very, very gracious. And it's a great pleasure to be here. I could not be happier to have been asked. I'm always sorry for the misfortune of others, but I am made less sorry when it turns out to be to my advantage. I read the beginning of a story which is it's a story from my most recent collection, which is the Miracle Boy and Other Stories. And this is the last story in the collection. It's a story called Zog 19, and it was my first foray into science fiction. So this is the beginning of Zog 19. Zog 19 is learning to drive a stick shift. He backs up, judders to a stop, and stalls. It's a big Ford F-250 diesel that he's driving, and it's got a hinky clutch. The two shovel-headed dogs in the bed of the truck bark hysterically. On Zog 19's planet, there are no cars and trucks with manual transmissions. There are no motor vehicles at all. Zog 19 shakes his head, flaps his hands, stomps in on the hinky clutch, and twists the ignition key. The Ford rattles back into life. Zog 19 decides that he will sell the Ford at the first opportunity and replace it with a vehicle that has an automatic transmission. In his short time here on Earth, Zog 19 has had about all he can stand of stick shifts. A woman watches Zog 19 struggles with the truck. She squints her eyes worriedly. She thinks she's watching Donnie McGinty fighting the hinky clutch. She is Mrs. McGinty. She is Donnie McGinty's wife. Zog 19 is not, in fact, young McGinty, but he resembles McGinty down to the most minute detail. Even McGinty's dogs believe that Zog 19 is McGinty. The problem is, Zog 19 does not know how to drive a stick shift, and McGinty does. McGinty did. McGinty knew how to do a blue million things that Zog 19 has never even so much as heard of on his own planet. The Ford leaps forward several feet, stops, lurches forward again, dies. Mrs. McGinty shakes her head in disbelief. McGinty has never before, to her knowledge, had a bit of trouble with the truck, though that clutch often defies her. She is a small woman. Her legs aren't long enough or strong enough to manipulate the truck's pedals. Around her, around Mrs. McGinty and Zog 19, McGinty's little dairy operation, 100 acres of decent land in the river bottom, inherited upon the death of McGinty's old man, and 25 complacent cows, is going to rack and ruin. In the days when McGinty's old man ran the place, it gleamed, it glistened. No more, though. There are so many things that Zog 19 doesn't know how to accomplish. Zog 19 waves to Mrs. McGinty from the truck. He wants badly to allay her apprehensions about him. Toot, toot, he says. On Zog 19's planet, no one communicates by talking. All of Zog 19's people are equipped with powerful steam whistles. Well, not steam whistles exactly, because they sound using sentient gases rather than steam. The Zogs use their whistles to talk back and forth, using a system not unlike Morse code. On Zog 19's planet, toot toot means don't worry. It also means I love you, and everything is A-OK. Everything is just peachy keen. So I'll stop there. And when we talk about muses, when I learned I was going to be on a panel, we were talking about the muse or muses. My thoughts turn immediately to actual people, to literal people, people who call forth my writing, and people who are necessary to my writing. And I'm fortunate enough in my life to have had three very distinct muses of exactly that sort. One is the writer Joyce Carol Oates, who was my first and really my only important creative writing teacher. The other is a 300-pound cop who's a sheriff's deputy in Roanoke, Virginia. And I was hoping we could put up pictures. I should have thought to ask, because he just sent me a picture today of he's standing there. He's learning to fight Apache style. And so and in the picture, he's just standing, a huge guy. He looks kind of like me, except a very big version of me. He's totally bald, and he's got his uniform on. He's grinning manically, and he's got a steel tomahawk in one hand and a curved knife in the other hand. and he is also a muse. He's a person for whom I write, and who, when I think about him, I think that I want my writing to please that person. And Joyce Carol Oates very much the same way, that there's not a day when I write that I don't hear her voice in my head, that I don't hear, I mean, very distinct sentences speaking to me and that help me and enable me to write. I'm going to embarrass her. I think I have special dispensation to embarrass her, but the third is Adrienne Brodeur. And this story in particular was written when she was the editor at Zoetrope, All Story. And it was a distinct departure. It was a complete departure. For me, to that time, I'd been pretty much a realist writer, writing out of my Appalachian background, writing stories, things that could happen, in our agreed upon reality. And I got to know Adrienne and began to trust her and knew that she would read my work with sympathy. And that gave me the confidence to take a whole new direction in my writing. And most of my newest book, which took 15 years to write in the end, is surrealist work, or at least work that has surrealist elements. There's science fiction, there's horror. One of the stories in there ended up published in a thing called the Mammoth Book of Best New Horror, number 20. I've never been happier in my life, and so it is the confidence those people have in me and in my ability, and their willingness to read my work with a large and open heart that makes me able to sit down and do new things, to do something other than to try to repeat the successes of my past, and which very quickly palls and very quickly becomes stale for, I think, both for the writer and the reader. And in the end, that's my entire audience. I literally, if I can please even two of those three people, then I feel like I've done my job, and so that's for me it is that is the panel of folks to whom I'm writing. Those are quite literally the three muses in my life. So.
Great, thank you. And on the end here, absolutely. And bravo to the muses in our midst. David Mason, to my far left, you may have noticed is not the poet David St. John, who is also listed in your program, and who was scheduled to teach our poetry workshop this week and sit on this panel. But unfortunately, he was forced to cancel due to a medical emergency. And I'm convinced now that the gods are messing with Mo and Adrienne's minds. Their first conference are just going to throw them some panic mode moments as an inaugural treat. David has had all of, I think, 4 days to prepare to be here and to teach the workshop and to sit on this panel, and we are so pleased and grateful. So I've come to refer to this panel as the pinch hit panel, plus the stalwart. David's award-winning books of poems include The Buried Houses, The Country I Remember, and Arrivals. His 2007 verse novel, Ludlow, based on the 1914 massacre by the Colorado National Guard of striking miners and their families, was named the best poetry book of the year by the Contemporary Poetry Review. He's the author of a memoir, News from the Village, and 2 essay collections, including his latest, Two Minds of a Western Poet. His poetry, prose, and translations have appeared in such periodicals and anthologies as The New Yorker, Harper's, The Nation, The New Republic, The New York Times, and Best American Poetry. He has also written the libretti for composer Laurie Laitman's opera of The Scarlet Letter. He is a former Fulbright Fellow to Greece and currently serves as the Poet Laureate of Colorado. Please welcome David Mason.
I want to give you 3 short poems and talk about their implications with regard to what we're talking about here today. The first one is by my favorite Australian poet, okay? It's about the experience of sitting on a beach in Australia. It's called Under the Sun. And it goes, taking an hour from time and again, I offer the sun, the gold of my skin. Brushed by a breeze of couldn't care less, I rest my head on my rolled up dress, till all of give is shift at my hips, and all of need is salt on my lips, and all of time is the tidal span, and all I am an impression in sand. Great poem, huh? That's by a poet named Callie Conan Davies. I know her as Chrissy Mason. She's my wife. But what I want to point out about this Flesh and Blood muse, we have multiple muses, all of us, I think, is that I fell in love with her language before I fell in love with her. I knew her language before I met her in the flesh. What I fell in love with partly was something I would call the voice of poetry. And the voice of poetry has something to do with language that is beyond any of us, and something to do with that liminal and imaginal space that's even between the lines or between the words that we're using as our medium. So my falling in love with particular poems, which is where I begin as a writer, where I began in childhood, my falling in love with sounds, with the music of poems, has made me the kind of writer and reader and appreciator I am. One of the things I'm appreciating about the fiction I've just heard is the wonderful sound and rhythm that's going on in the language that's being used. And I'll just tell you flat out, if I'm not attracted by a sound in what I'm reading, I'm not interested. I read with the ear. I go for what's happening in my ear, and that pulls me in, and then all the other stuff starts to operate. Well, I'm going to give you two short poems of mine, and they all come out of the sort of eruption of my life, of meeting Chrissy, changing my life, and all that sort of stuff, and having a real life muse in my life now, and all that stuff. The first one is really a poem about a kind of crisis, a kind of argument with a friend who doubted me, who thought I must be crazy to be making the choices I was making in my life. The friend was wrong. The friend was just judgmental and trying to judge on the basis of her own projections of her experience, right? This is a poem called Another Thing, and I can talk about it a little bit more afterwards. Like fossil shells embedded in a stone, you are an absence, rimmed calligraphy, a mouthing out of silence, a way to be beyond the bedroom where you lie alone. So why not be the vast antipodal cloud you soloed under, riven by cold gales? And why not be the song of diving whales? Why not the plosive surf below the road? The others are one thing. They know they are. One compass needle. They have found their way and navigate by perfect cynosure. Go wreck yourself once more against the day and wash up like a bottle on the shore, lucidity and salt in all you say. Now, there are a lot of things going on in that poem. One is that it's an argument with a friend, it's an argument with myself. It happens to be a sonnet. I don't typically write sonnets, but the form came to my aid and helped me get through this argument I was having. The ocean imagery comes from my love of Chrissy, but it also comes from the fact that we now have a house in Oregon, so we can be by the sea as well as in Colorado. I grew up in the Northwest, and so both landscapes are extremely important to me. Antipodal cloud, that vast antipodal cloud you soloed under, riven by cold gales. This is, the antipodes, the antipodes, the Australia, New Zealand part of the globe. I happen to have been in New Zealand. I still haven't been in Australia. So a lot of friends have assumed that the second person pronoun in the poem is really referring to Chrissy, that it's really a poem about Chrissy as somebody who soloed under this vast antipodal cloud. She lived a gypsy life for years in a van in Australia. Well, maybe it is. Maybe it's a poem about Chrissy, and maybe it's a poem about me, and maybe it's a poem that opens up a kind of wrestling and a kind of sound that other people can enter into too. I'm going to finish with a short poem called The Soul Fox. Literally, one night we were sitting in our cabin in Manitou Springs, Colorado. I teach at Colorado College. And looking out the window, and my favorite animal hopped by, a fox. Foxes are just, I think, my favorite animal on earth. And I adore them every time I see them in whatever circumstance. As it happens, that was the day that a great man who was a big influence on Chrissy's life died, a psychologist, James Hillman. James Hillman is just an extraordinary modern thinker. He died in October 2011. He's the psychologist who reminds us that the word psychology really means a study of soul, and that we've in some sense gone wrong in psychology by moving away from that notion of what psychology is. Well, Chrissy was just crushed at the news that Hillman was dead. I got up the next morning and very quickly wrote her this poem. It's obviously a love poem, but it's a poem about what we're all doing here as well. It's called The Soul Fox. My love, the fox is in the yard. The snow will bear his print a while, then melt and go. But we who saw his way of finding out, his night of seeking, know what we have seen and are the better for it. Write. Let the white page bear the mark, then melt with joy upon the dark. So, I think that's enough of that.
I'm curious, for all of you, how your relationship with the Muse has changed and evolved over the course of your career as writers. Is it something that, does it have peaks and valleys? Does it wax and wane? Or are you sort of, anointed with this endless well of inspiration?
Yeah, definitely that.
You better all go home.
I've always been uncomfortable with the word muse. I just have to get that out there. There's something.
It's a contrivance.
There's something like about a woman in a long gown. When I hear the word muse, that makes my skin crawl a little. And I had, interestingly, all male teachers. Just accidentally, there weren't any women teaching at Utah when I went there, so all of my serious creative writing teachers were men. And they talked a lot about the Muse, and that was a little creepy, certain ways. So for me, it's really about finding safety. It's like finding a place of some bravery to move forward into, and for me, that really often has to do with form. Even though I'm not a poet, I make my fiction students write formal poems. I always say form will set you free. I made my students today write a formal piece of prose. For me, I used to listen to writers talk about outlines, as a way of finding safety. And I used to just think, outlines, God, if I had to make an outline, I would, tend bar for a living. I just can't stand the idea of writing an outline. And then I talked to more writers. I talked to John Irving at length about his very complex outlines. And I thought, he's just doing with an outline what I'm doing with this idea of form. And that's just thinking, okay, what is the shape of this story? And for me, it's really geometric. It's like, I don't think, what is the story about? What am I trying to tell? I think this story is a spirograph flower attached to a slinky, or, this story is a Rubik's Cube, or this story is, 7 rhombuses next to each other. I know that sounds insane, but it's what makes me feel safe. And so when I knew that this book, for instance, was 144 small boxes, 12 by 12, a gross. I love 12s. I love to do things in 12s. I thought, well, I don't have to write a novel. I just have to fill 144 boxes. And that made it seem really possible to me. Like once I knew, like I have to fill those 144 boxes and then worry about where we were. So for me, you know, if we're really going to talk about muse, if we're going to try to use the word muse, like for me, everything, you know, everything in the concrete physical world is available to me all the time. And I'm a big noticer, and I'm just sucking it in and taking it in and writing it down. But for me, that's really the easy part. That's my daily practice. The hump that I have to get over as a writer, I never have a shortage of things I want to tell, ever. It's the hump I have to get over is the fear of screwing them up. Like the fear of having all this good raw material and then being afraid I'm not going to be able to put it together in a way where it will move the reader like it moved me, even if it's the tiniest thing, if it's the color of the water in the late afternoon, you know, it can be the tiniest thing. I think, well, I can't get that. I'm not good enough. So for me, the way to get over that hump and to actually sit down and start writing, which I go weeks and months without doing, to actually say, okay, I'm brave enough to take all these little glimmery things that I found in the world and try to make something out of them, that's my hump, is to think of a form, a shape, a geometric, a math problem often is what it looks like in my mind, to make myself feel confident, to move forward, to take that stuff and start to play with it. And then once I'm playing with it, I'm quite happy in that little playroom, you know, and I might violate the form. That's one of my things. Like, well, I'm going to start with this form, and then I might break it later, which is okay, because by that time I'll be over that hump of the initial fear of getting in.
I had this, the Greek word for muse is musa, and I had this Greek friend come up to me once and say, "Κάθε ποιητής πρέπει να έχει musa," which means every poet must have a muse. But I'm hard of hearing, and I thought he said, "Κάθε ποιητής πρέπει να έχει musi," which means every poet must have a beard. It's the story of my life, you know? And I said, no, there are lots of poets who are women, you know? And he looked at me like, you know. So yeah, it's not, it really, when I talked about the voice of poetry, I really meant that I'm in love with something, and I find that love embodied in all sorts of things in the world and all sorts of things in kinds of voices, kinds of stories, etc. I was thinking about your policeman friend. Greatest storytellers I ever knew. One was the widow of a lumberjack and who took care of my brothers and me when we were growing up. And the other was my Uncle Frank, who was a rodeo cowboy and candy maker in Trinidad, Colorado. And Frank could really tell a story. He was just great. I've always heard his voice in my head. But like Pam, and I write narrative and dramatic stuff as well as lyrical stuff, I really love knowing that I've got some sense of a form, or at least a ballpark form, even when I'm doing a narrative, where I may not know anything about an ending or what's going to happen to these people or anything like that. But if I know some direction I'm headed in some sense of shape, then I feel free to allow myself to work within that context, and I feel great confidence. It's like I can set this piece of work aside for any amount of time and come back to it. I don't have to get it all done right now. And I know that I've got something there that's going to help me contain the process.
So is the form then, in a sense, a source of inspiration? I mean, the form itself? Or obviously it's a container.
Not for me. It's not, the form doesn't inspire me. The form, as Pam said, liberates me to be inspired, to find my way through the experience I got to go through.
For me, it's like there's this place I love to go in Hawaii because I love to swim out in the ocean really far. I love to swim out in the ocean as far as I can, but I also don't want to die. You know, I used to want to die, but I don't anymore. So I always stay at the same hotel on the Big Island because it happens to be set in this giant cove, like 10 miles long. So there's no rip currents in there, so I can swim for like a half a mile out. Like that cove is my 144 boxes. You know, it's like once I have that giant parameter that may even be artificial. I mean, who knows? A shark could come, right? You know, it's an artificial feeling of safety, but but it still works for me. Then anything is possible. Once I decide on a form, I'm willing to try anything.
I want to get to what I suspect a lot of the folks here are particularly interested in, as well as inspiration. But what do you do with the critic? You said, Pam, just a few minutes ago, when you're wrestling with "I'm not good enough," and thinking, my God, at what point do you know that you're good enough and it's okay? But anyway, I mean, after how many books, or never, perhaps. But really the question is, so when the critic gets so loud, or does it still with you all, and does it become paralyzing? And if so, how do you move beyond that?
Well, I mean, for me, that's exactly why I have those folks out there. The audience, the critic is me. Yeah, I mean, I'm horrible to myself when I write, and those people, and I do mean them literally, because I show them my work, but I also mean just the embodiments of them that I have in my head. I can always write to them, and they're always really nice about it. Yeah, and they're happy to see it, and I have a built-in audience. I mean, because the terror for me is an unknowable audience. Yeah, this faceless, nameless audience that may not even exist, and I don't ever have to worry about that, because I have this audience. They're all people who I want to impress them. I have that. That kid thing, right? That you're just like, is this good? Is this good? Am I smart? Am I, does this make you happy? And they also all intimidate the hell out of me, and particularly the extremely large, well-armed guy. And I mean, you want to make him happy, right? You want to write a story that he's going to go, ha ha, that's funny. I won't kill you now. And so that's the great relief for me, and that's what silences the critic, is like that voice. You can just say, who the hell cares what you think? Let's ask them what they think. What are those? What are those folks who love you and love your work and want to see it and are eager for you to do it? They don't think you're wasting your time. So even if you think you're wasting your time sitting or typing, there are those folks out there who will tell you unequivocally you're not wasting your time and you're not wasting their time making stuff to show to them.
I want to just tell a little story, but first I want to say that I believe, even after a lot of therapy and other things, I believe that insecurity, that doubt, is absolutely the price of admission to this ball game. And if you don't have it, you're an asshole. That is really my belief. And I've met a few. But I do want to tell a story. I'll try to make it as quick as I can. Several years ago, when Toni Morrison published the novel Love, I say this with great pride. I'm not even going to try to slough it off. This is one of the things I'm most proud of. Oprah chose me to interview her. And it was honestly, I used to say it was the greatest day of my professional life. I'm just going to go a step further and say it was the greatest day of my whole life. And I got to spend the whole day with Toni Morrison, who is my idol, my hero. And she was every bit as magnificent as all my absurd expectations of her, and more so. But anyway, after this interview where we had a wonderful day together and she let me stay around forever and it was so great, a few weeks later, the Kirkus Review, which is a pre-publication review of Love, came out. And one of the things that Toni was worried about is that she was worried they were printing 500,000 copies, and she thought that was too many. And so she called me and she said, "Can I read you this Kirkus Review?" And I said, oh no, I'm busy. No, I'm just kidding. I said, of course. And so she read me the Kirkus Review, which is just a little review. It's a couple paragraphs. Every book has one. It's what helps booksellers decide how many copies to buy. And it was, not since William Faulkner, blah, blah, blah. The one true American voice, blah, blah, blah. No one does with language what Toni Morrison, etc. It was just praise, 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 praise. Got to the last line and it said, "With love, Toni Morrison returns to the level of greatness that won her a Nobel Prize. And so I said, well, that's great. I said, that's going to sell 500,000 books. That's beautiful. And she said, what does she mean returns? And I thought, well, this is like a new friendship moment. So I said, well, she means she didn't like Paradise. And Toni said, Paradise was my best book. And I said, I love Paradise, and I do. I love it so much. I can hardly talk about it. I can hardly teach it because I love it so much. And I said, I love Paradise. And she said, but this woman who was getting paid $3.95 an hour to write these reviews didn't love it. And she said, I want everyone to love all my books. And I thought, well, there it is. Like, there it is right there. There is no one in this time or any other time that has received more validation as a writer than Toni Morrison. 100 American writers, mostly white men, were asked who is the best writer in America, and something like 75% of them said Toni Morrison. I mean, you can't win any more than she's won, and yet there she was with that little insecurity. What does she mean returns? And it really taught me something. I thought, well, in a way, that's kind of beautiful. It's kind of beautiful that Toni Morrison is really sad that this woman who wrote this Kirkus review didn't get Paradise,
I think we should move on to questions. We've got about 10 minutes, and I bet you all have questions about what to do when you're stuck or others. Yes, please, right. I'm just going to ask you to wait for the microphone to come to you because it's being recorded. Thank you.
What do you do when you think a book has died on you?
And is that directed to any one of our...
Everybody and anybody.
One you're reading or one you're writing?
Oh, well, my turn. When I was in my 20s, I wrote 4 failed novels that are in a box somewhere. I wanted to be a fiction writer more than anything, and the poetry just took off, and I snuck a verse novel in there along the way and some opera libretti and things like that. But I keep thinking every now and then that I'm going to write a novel. And I started a novel a few years ago, and I got a certain distance, and then got afraid about it. Got maybe 120 pages in. And it still nags me. It's sitting in a file in the cabin in Manitou, and I still think, I've got a big summer coming ahead. Maybe I should go back to that novel. And I just don't feel this kind of internal energy that I need to feel to work on a longer project. I need to feel that something has built up, an urgency has built up in me over years that means I need to write that thing. And it's just occurred to me now that maybe I shouldn't write something if I don't feel that I absolutely need to write it. Now, I say that cautiously, because in truth, the professional writers who really do churn out the good novels year in and year out, they must know how to just go back to work and blow some life back into the thing. And maybe I could indeed do that. But I'm busy enough and occupied enough with certain things that I'm just kind of suspicious of whether that needs to be brought back to life, that book. So I'm going to let it sit for a while longer and see what happens.
Has that happened with with you two, that midway into a project it just seems, and then you have to do something or not do something to resurrect it?
It always happens to me. I always get to the 100-page mark, whether it's a collection or a novel, and I just hit a wall. And now I know that, 5 books in, I know that's what happens to me. I have never abandoned one, and that's partly because my sign is Capricorn, and I was born in the Chinese year of the ox, so I've got a goat and an ox working for me, and honestly, like but it never doesn't happen. I always get to 100 pages and I freak out. And what I do now is I just go away. Like I used to just agonize for months. And now I just say, oh, I'm going to try to write a stage play, you know, or like I just think, okay, all right, walk away and do some other things. Write those essays on craft you keep meaning to write, you know, whatever. Do some book reviews. And then after a few months, I'm ready to come back in. But I've never let anything big, and when I say big, I even mean, you know, significant short stories to me. I've never let anything go.
Yeah, I think my only published novel died at about page 230, and unfortunately it's like 400 pages long. So yeah, I've backed off from novels, and I write pretty short, because then if that goes bad on you, you know, you don't have quite so much sunk cost.
Let's, yes, right here. Microphone's on its way.
Well, I've been working out for years for this marathon that's right here in front of me. And I'm looking at these people that have all finished this many marathons, and I just can't start. I can't really go, okay, I'm done. And I read my own writing sometimes. I'm sure you've done this, and you go, wait, did I really write that? Wow, that's pretty good. Yeah. And so I know that gift's there. I know it is. And I guess that's why I'm here. I'm, you know, in a lot of ways, that's why I'm here. But I just wanted to comment on that, because I have a really big trouble starting or finishing, I suppose.
Okay, question right here. Do you still have a question? Yeah. Okay, great.
Well, this
Or
sort
do
of
you, I'm
question.
sorry, do you want to comment
Do
on
you
that?
want to
I
comment? Yeah,
I wasn't sure there was a question, it was a statement. Okay, oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Comments or advice?
You know, there's a funny trick the mind plays on itself to, using the phrase that's commonly used, give yourself permission to write anything, and especially to write things that scare you in some way. There are ways in which you disassociate yourself from the self, when you step aside from the ego and just become the thing you're writing. Sometimes that happens anyway. That when the self-consciousness comes in so heavily, I can't even talk, let alone write anything. And so there's an odd way in which just over time you'll try to learn to turn the ego off, even though that's a game, even though it's a lie, a finesse, a card trick, or whatever it is, and just get into the groove of language itself. And language is its own current, and it will carry you somewhere. Trust it. And the other part is that, as anybody will tell you, from my point of view, what usually happens, especially with short things, is I feel a need to write when I've been reading intensely. And it doesn't mean I'm going to imitate anything I'm reading, or it doesn't mean that I'm going to be influenced by what I'm reading, anything like that. It just means I'm taking all this linguistic energy into my body, and my body's got to do something with it. And I'll just go, and it won't have anything to do with me. It'll have to do with how I need to make something happen in words. That's not a very helpful answer, but it's moderately true.
Yeah, for me, it's partly what I was saying about form. It's also about focusing really hard on what I think of as the concrete physical world, just meaning, like, I don't have to write today about my bad childhood. I just have to describe the way the wind is turning the surface of the water into a kind of beautiful thing of beauty, or whatever. Like I try really hard, and I talked about this the other day, so I don't want to repeat myself, but I try really hard to keep what I think of as my conscious brain and my analytical brain out of all that. I try to just like get the physical thing that I noticed that had resonance for me out of the world and onto the page, and then worry about it later, worry about what I'm going to do with it later. And I don't try to connect them, I don't try to reason with them, I don't try to figure out why they have resonance for me or what they mean. I just get them down and then move on to the next one and write that funny car and you know, get it down and move on to the next one, the vodka bottle with the red roses in it, whatever it is, like whatever that thing is that that I see that has that clutch at my heart, I just try to pick it up, put it down on the page, leave it alone. I'll worry about what it means later. And that seems really possible to me. Like if I go to my writing table and say, I just have to describe that vodka bottle. Yeah, there was this Kettle One, I don't know if I said this the other day, there was this Kettle One bottle at this Valentine's Day party that the caterer had frozen into a block of ice with all these red roses in it. And I couldn't take my eyes off of it. And the party was really dull. And I hate parties. I mean, it was my fault that the party was dull. I'm terrible at parties. I hear myself saying this. I said this yesterday. But anyway, like there was this block of ice. I could not take my eyes off it. So then all I have to do the next morning when I sit down to write is get that vodka bottle. I don't have to think about my mother or the drunk or any of that. I just have to get that vodka bottle with the red roses in it onto the page. And then if I do that, I think, okay, what else did I notice yesterday? Oh, my dog like peed on that family heirloom. Okay, well that might be something. Write it down. You know, that's how I work, and that's how I make it possible to get in there without any kind of big notion of, I'm going to start my novel today, or I'm going to write about my psychic pain today. Like, I would never, it would just never happen.
Thank you. Does that help? Is there another?
Yeah,
yes, oh, great. Yeah. Yes, we have time. I think this is, yes, one more.
Test. Okay. I'm going to cushion my question as a quick story for you guys to respond to. I just want to say one thing. I think there's something about having a good relationship with fear, which is part of the creative process. But you were talking a while ago about the form, the container, that whether it's temporary or long-lasting, that creates a safety to move forward. And maybe I have a friend who's a sifu at a kung fu school, and we were talking about when they awarded the first black belt. And she said, you know, nobody ever is a black belt when we award their first black belt. But we know that at that point, they need to have the belt to grow into that. So we give them the black belt. And that's what I'm using that as a ploy for you to respond to that concept.
I wish I knew karate. No, I was going to say that way.
Do you feel that you've arrived as writers, or are, you know, I mean, is that sort of what you're saying? That at what point do you?
What I got from that conversation was that, you know, if I anticipate, am I ready? I'll never be ready. And they don't, and they know that their students are not ready, but they also know that they have to be given a form so they can be willing to grow into that.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I really believe that so much about good writing comes from the subconscious, the unconscious. Like when I took a leap from short stories to a novel, now I love the short story form. It's my favorite still. But I did write 2 novels. And, you know, I knew how to kind of basically hold with my conscious mind enough pieces to make a short story. But there was no way I could do that with a novel. So I started to think more intensely about form. But I was really just tricking myself. Because, in fact, you know, it was my subconscious that was taking care of all that stuff when I was trying to describe the vodka bottle, right? Like I feel like if I can stay really small and specific, that big stuff is being taken care of by my subconscious, by the collective, you know, the river that's flowing over all our heads, you know. I think that's all, like, I'm part of a big conversation that's all happening up here. So all I have to do is stay out of that thing's way. You know, all I have to do is like focus on my little vodka bottle and my little rose petals, and that way I'm not going to screw any of this up. You know, that's really how I feel. That's my response to that. I see now what you mean. It took me a minute.
Okay, and on that note, we will thank you all for coming. Thanks to our panelists. we will follow the talk with a book signing in the lobby. And I have to say, I'm so sorry, but Pinkney's books are not here yet because he's barely here. But they will be on Thursday, and we hope you will all come back for a final book signing we will have at our closing reception on Thursday when we will have your books in stock, and we really wish they were here now. Thanks, and we'll see you at the next event.